Okay. And you could probably tell if those are people you know.
I was just looking at the names. I had not recognized any of them yet.
If any of you are daughters, it would be really nice if you would add DOK at the end of your name. Okay, I'm going to ask Liz can you show me first and then, yeah, there we go. Welcome to the March 5th edition, if you will, of the Lenten series for 2026. We have a really interesting history for you today, and so I am so pleased that you're here. We will open with the Woman's Prayer. My name is Sandra Squires, and I'm the secretary of the board for EWIP and also the person who chairs the committee for this series. So we'll open with the Woman's Prayer and O God, creator of all life, bless the unsung lives of countless Christian women in every century who were your hands and feet, who kept alive your compassionate presence by feeding the hungry, nursing the sick, clothing the naked, comforting the sad, praying and petitioning, strengthening those in prison, teaching the stories, sewing and singing, weeping and rejoicing. Grant us the wisdom to discern our ministries in this day as our foremothers found theirs. Lead us new and timeless forms of discipleship, and let us joyfully find our place in this procession of praise, offering our varied gifts and voices together with them and Mary, the mother of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much for being with us today. And I just want to say that if you are a daughter, if you don't mind, you could just put DOK after your name if you know how to do that. And that would show kind of some solidarity with our speaker. We're just so delighted that you've come today and have chosen to spend this time with us. I want to tell you a little bit about, first of all, throughout the talk that Susan's going to give, if you can just put any questions in the chat, and then I'll read those to her so that she can respond to those after the presentation. And let's see what else. I think that's all I want to do before I introduce her. Susan O'Brien is the currently the archives chair for Daughters of the King at the national level. She is a cradle Episcopalian who graduated from Rosary College, now Dominican University, in River Forest, Illinois, with a BA in American Studies and English. She was inspired by the vocation of the nuns who were her professors, but wanted to live her life in close relationship to God. That desire brought her to the Daughters of the King, which is called the Order of the Daughters of the King, when she was in her 30s. The rhythm of our order, the retreats, the assemblies, and quiet days, the gathering in community, and fulfilling vows of prayer and service, meets the needs she first recognized in her college self. God's gift gave her the confidence to say yes when asked to serve in elected offices at all levels of the order. And most recently, she in 2015 to 2018, she was the national secretary. From 2012 to 2015, she was the national secretary. From 2015 to 2018, she was the national president. And then she was the Royal Cross editor, which is the primary publication from 2018 to 24, and now is the archives chair. So she is very closely aligned with daughter, and we are so thrilled to have you here today, Susan. So we'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Sandra, for inviting me to present about one of my passions, particularly after listening to you read my biography, and that feels a little odd. It really is a passion, the order on many levels, as a daughter, as a member of leadership in there, and as a hobbyist historian. So if you give me a couple of minutes, I need to start my screen share. So the Order of the Daughters of the King, 140 years of prayer and service. The other thing that's kind of scary is when I look back on my biography, I've been part of those 140 years for 40 years. It said, time flies. So at the time of our founding on Easter Eve in 1885, I'm sorry, there's an echo that's kind of throwing me off. Is that me?
Try speaking now, please.
Thank you, Liz. All right, so far I'm not here. Thank you. So at the time of our founding in 1885, the Episcopal Church, along with other denominations across the country, were experiencing a time of renewal and revival. And some of these activities had some evangelical leanings. The Women's Auxiliary, which we now know as the Episcopal Churchwomen, was established in 1871 and eventually became the major source of funding and personnel for the church's mission work. In 1883, the Brotherhood of St. Andrew was established at St. Andrew's Chapel at St. James Cathedral in Chicago, Illinois. Beginning in 1885, many bishops began setting apart women through prayer and the laying out of hands to be deaconesses, to serve the poor and the sick, a ministry that was modeled after the German Lutheran Church. And there were other monastic and religious orders that were springing up at that time. So it was in that period of time that we're going to talk about the story of our founder. We don't have a lot of personal information about her. Most of what we have is related to her work with the Order of the Daughters of the King. Margaret Maggie Franklin was born April 28th, 1854. Maiden name was Gilsey. She died January 19th, 1931. And during those years, she married her husband, Eugene Franklin, and they were the parents of two daughters. Her husband Eugene died in 1910, and at the time of her death, Margaret was living with one of her daughters, Mrs. Hald. She was 31 years of age when she founded the order, a young, active mother. There's a lot written up in different tones about the founding of the order. What I'd like to do is to actually read Margaret's words on the founding of the order. So the origin of the Alpha chapter and its relation to the order, by Mrs. Margaret Franklin, and she wrote this in 1894. Having so frequently been asked of late what relation Alpha chapter has borne to the order and of the origin of the order, I here give an outline of its history, the first part of which was published in the Proceedings of the First Council. One of the senior Bible classes for young ladies in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, New York City, had for its class name, Daughters of the King. Desirous of stimulating its members to greater activity and more earnest zeal for Christ and the Church, their teacher, which would have been Margaret, called a meeting for the purpose of arousing their sympathy and interest, and to urge their cooperation as a class in some defined work and object for the parish. The result of the meeting was so encouraging, and the spirit of enthusiasm so earnest for greater activity, that having obtained the rector's consent to their forming an association, a committee was appointed to select a badge and a motto, to be worn by members as a sign of their membership and Christian obligations. After mature deliberation, the committee reported, and the badge and mottos so well known to you all were selected. At first, the daughters exerted their efforts for the extension of their own Bible class, and in order to render the Sunday school more attractive to newcomers, they secured, through united effort, a new Sunday school library. Members of the Sunday school were encouraged to say the church catechism, letter perfect, and in regular succession then, the collects for the entire church year. This was done in order to stimulate attendance and to familiarize all with the prayer book. So, quietly, for more than 2 years, the daughters' influence was exerted and soon became recognized in the parish. Then from other classes and other fields came the request to wear the badge and join the efforts. At this time, the Reverend Mr. Kenyon was called to the parish, and it was decided after consultation with him to establish the order on a permanent basis, and the Constitution and prayers as first issued by us were then formulated and the name Alpha Chapter selected. Alpha Chapter, according to Article 5 of the Constitution then adopted, was to act in a twofold capacity. One, as a parochial chapter. Two, as the acting council, until 50 chapters should be formed. As a parochial chapter, it had one set of officers. As the acting council, it had another complete set. It also kept 2 distinct sets of minutes and accounts. Thus equipped, Alpha Chapter started forth on its missions for the extension of Christ's kingdom, though their numbers were few and their resources were limited. As a parochial chapter, it seemed so hard at first to carry out faithfully their rule of service, but by degrees, what seemed almost an impossibility at first, we realized, after all, simply a single effort, an act or word, done with a sincere purpose to bring some woman nearer the church. Realizing this, house-to-house visitations were made. Cards were distributed inviting others to the church services. A pew was reserved in the church to which young women were especially asked. The Girls' Friendly was established, and these, together with the Thanksgiving dinners to the poor and the distribution of gifts at Christmas to the different hospitals, constituted the acts by which we tried to be true to the object of the order and our rule of service. Our growth was not apparent until 1889. The work up to this time was borne solely by the Alpha Chapter through its monthly dues, upon which members were also dependent for the gifts as a parochial chapter. In August of 1891, the 50 chapters required by the Constitution were formed. But it being midsummer, it was deemed best not to call the council until October, as many were away on their summer rest. The first council was convened on November 5th, 1891, at St. Bartholomew's Church, New York City, at which time Alpha Chapter laid down its work as acting council, having issued over 80 chapters. Such is its history. As I glance back today at the Feast of the Ascension, which commemorates also the time when my little band started forth with untrained and unskilled fingers to plant the seeds for our Father's kingdom, it is with a heart full of gratitude and thankfulness to Him who has permitted your efforts for His sake to be blessed so abundantly. So this slide shows one of the cards that they sent out during that organizational time from 1885 to 1885 into 1893, when the conventions were being held. And you can see on here the reference to the society of our sister society, the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, and it has listed down the 2 rules of the order. And you can see at the very top that it is purely a church organization. They were really emphasizing the spiritual aspect of this. And I also read to you what I read to you first was Margaret's report of the First Order, obviously subjective. I'd like to read a brief excerpt from a more objective report. So this is from the New York Tribune in 1891, headlined, Daughters of the King Organize, subtitle, Forming a Central Association and Electing Officers. A meeting was held yesterday at St. Bartholomew's Church to form a central organization. In the morning, the Reverend Ralph Kenyon, Grand Chaplain, delivered an address. The president of Alpha Chapter of this city gave an interesting account of the origin of the society and its work for the past 5 years. The report of the corresponding secretary, Miss Elizabeth Ryerson, showed that there were 63 chapters scattered throughout the states, with an aggregate membership between 1,500 and 2,000. The treasurer, Miss Annie Craigle, reported a balance in the treasury of $882.36. The leadership in organizing the council provided that members of the order must be communicants of the Protestant Episcopal Church. Also, that the dues of each chapter shall be 25 cents per capita for its membership. Also, that membership of the council shall consist of officers of the Alpha Chapter and 15 other members of the order. And to this day, we continue on with 15 members on National Council. We also add at this point the 8 provincial presidents. When I was reading Margaret's account, she referred to the cross, but she referred to it as the badge of the order. This is a drawing of that badge. It is a silver cross. Our bylaws now call it a silver colored because some of them are made out of pewter or rhodium is the current material that's made. So it's a silver color cross. It is modeled after the cross atop the Church of the Resurrection, which was called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Margaret's time. I don't know if it was from the very beginning, but for many decades, Tiffany's made the order's crosses until 1986, at which point James Avery took over the making of the crosses. Margaret also mentioned a motto. And originally, the motto, let me go back to the last one. Originally, when she talks about a motto, that motto was, and pardon me, I don't speak Latin, magnanimiter crucem sustene, which we shorten to English in uphold and bear the cross. So that was considered the original motto, with the bywords "for his sake" being represented by FHS. This is the motto of the order that currently we are more familiar with. This motto opens and closes many of the gatherings of the order's membership. We don't know for sure from either the National Council meeting minutes or the Royal Cross exactly when this motto was adopted. It's not mentioned in 1896 or 1897. And the next handbook we have is 1911, and it does appear in there, and it has appeared in our handbooks ever since that time. In a 1967 issue of the Royal Cross, Mrs. Cecilia Tucker spoke to the origin of this particular motto. The original author was Edward Everett Hale, born April 3rd, 1822 in Boston, Massachusetts. He was the fourth of 8 children of Sarah and Nathan Hale, his father being a nephew of the Nathan Hale of Revolutionary War fame. He became a chaplain to the U.S. Senate in 1903, which does narrow down that break between when we left Margaret's original motto. And it was from his desk as a Senate chaplain that he wrote the words to "I am but one." You can see on the screen what our motto is. The words that Edward Everett Hale wrote go, "I am only one, but I still am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." So to carry on from where Margaret's report ended, the Constitution was written in 1891 when they had the chapters, and it included those 2 rules, prayer and service, with evangelism being its mission, although they called it spreading Christ's kingdom. They didn't use that, what some Episcopalians considered the dirty E word. And they were completing charters for chapters that were being established. The slide that I'm showing now is a charter that was issued to a chapter in Broken Bow, Nebraska. And the order received a picture of this thanks to Sandra Squires and her connections to that province. And as you can see on the bottom, there is Margaret's signature, along with our original secretary, Elizabeth Ryerson. And the charter was given out by the Alpha chapter. So this was before the time that the Constitution was actually given. I think that's 1893, but it's a little hard for me to tell for sure. And chapter number 211. So when Elizabeth was giving, well, we weren't quite the first 80, but that was still a very early chapter. In 1892, then, the chapters were established. The leading members adopted the Constitution. They promoted the order to the clergy using postcards similar to the earlier slide that I had shown, and they planned their first convention. So the first convention was held in Baltimore, Maryland in 1893, and we were celebrating that first convention when we recently had our convention in 2022 in Baltimore. Some of those looks a little clearer than I first thought when I was running this, but the program that I'm showing from that convention looks pretty similar to some of the programs that we would be experiencing today, with the typical business agenda items and with various speakers. They also allowed 5-minute speeches from volunteers. Some of the stated speakers, the topics were, "What shall we make of it?" Our convention. "The daughter in Sunday school." I also like that they allowed time for our sisterhood societies, the Brotherhood of St. Andrew, the Women's Auxiliary, and the Ministering of Children's Leagues, to make presentations about their causes. I like the idea that it's encouraging our partnership. So while we are a semi-religious organization and a a high plane, we're not in this alone. We are working with the other societies that have been formed for different reasons. Where we think about workshops today, the listing of the conferences were actually more along the lines of presenting papers. So you had one on the model Bible class, the country girl who comes to the city, the mothers meeting, the local assembly, and of course one by the Girls Friendly. Until actually, I'd heard of the Girls Friendly before while I was working with ECW, and it was not until I was doing some of the preparation for this presentation that I found such a close connection with daughters. So you never stop learning. So this is a picture of Margaret Franklin in her older years. And I like to pick up then from the point from 1893 with the convention and share a little bit more of our history through the years. During its first decade, the order met annually and grew rapidly. The Royal Cross began publication in 1892, and we actually have a Royal Cross from August of 1892. Most of the Royal Crosses that I'm referring to now are available digitally on our website. The Royal Cross for many years was edited by the Alpha chapter member and secretary, Elizabeth Ryerson. Chapters were formed not only domestically, but internationally, forming in Canada, China, and several other countries. In 1896, the first junior daughters received their crosses at Emmanuel Parish in Washington, D.C., and that group was led by Mary Davenport. Very early in the 90s, the order sent a daughter to China as a missionary, and they set up the Self-Denial Fund to support her, the first fund of the order. I should mention that historically, from the very beginning, the daughters are not allowed to raise funds. It's one of the things that set them apart. It probably was Kenyon, our grand chaplain, who felt that if we were to raise fund, that would move our focus off of God and his work. So we were not allowed to raise funds. In 1907, for the first time, daughters from the Alpha chapter did not serve as officers, and the order claimed 17,000 members. Number to me is just astounding. In 1913, the Constitution that had been written in 1891 and adopted in 1892 was revised to represent that growth in the membership. And then in 1917, the Order of the Daughters of the King was incorporated in the state of New York. In the 1920s, there were two additional funds that were established after the Self-Denial Fund. The Master's Fund was established to support deaconesses in training, and then the Endowment Fund, which supported the work of the order. All of those funds are still in existence. The Self-Denial Fund is now called Mission and Outreach, and the Master's Fund is an educational fund, and it supports a lot of our female seminarians, but it will also support you if you were to do like the Education for Ministry program and some other spiritual related programs and spiritually related musical programs. Just before the 20s, we of course had an event that we wouldn't have thought a great deal about until COVID hit. So in the period right after World War I, we had the Spanish flu. So as we were going through COVID and during our time, and leadership was wondering, so what did the order do during the Spanish flu? We couldn't find a lot of information on it. We weren't sure if it was because we hadn't gotten to that part of the Royal Cross and making it digitally. Because of course, during COVID, none of us are going to the office. And the only access we had to any historical records were what we already had living on our computer or digitally on our website. But when we were able to get back to the office, After not finding anything in the Royal Cross, we started looking, particularly Grace Steers, past national president and archivist chair, went to look at some of the minutes from the period after World War I, like through 1916 through 1920. And she found indeed that the Spanish flu impacted the daughters as much then as we were impacted here. Meetings were not held. The Royal Cross was not published. Communications, obviously, they didn't have Zoom or our emails. They had to go strictly by mail. So basically, it was just the very basic business that was accomplished during that time. But individually, locally, in our chapters, we continued to live into our vows of prayer and service, just as we did during the COVID pandemic in 2020. Daughters carried on valiantly through the Great Depression, celebrating their 50th anniversary in 1935. I do want to split to one other thing first before we got to the Great Depression. While we were still in the roaring 20s, in 1928, Margaret Franklin and 200 daughters met with President Calvin Coolidge and suggested an annual day of prayer for the nation. Although the day of prayer was not established at that time, we do celebrate it now because it eventually came to fruition in 1952 under President Truman. But our leadership in the order has obviously continued to have some impact. So during the Great Depression, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. In 1934, they had recorded 5,385 members, so almost a two-thirds drop from 1907. In 388 chapters. Obviously, funds were hard to come by. World politics derailed travel, and daughters doing mission work in China were forced to leave. During World War II, many members turned to Red Cross work and paid jobs. The 1943 triennial was canceled. The order lost touch with the chapters in other countries that had been active earlier. After the war, the order renewed its quest for members, sought recognition of the Ministry of Women, and put out its first film. That first film is available on the YouTube through the Daughters website. It's an interesting snapshot. It was put out in the 50s, not just of the order, but also what our churches were like at that time. At the 75th anniversary in 1960, there were 6,584 daughters in 372 chapters, nearly 1,000 juniors in 65 chapters. Although there had been chapters in historically Black churches since the 1890s, a Black daughter was first elected to the National Council in 1964. And in 2018, in Austin, Texas, we elected the first Black national president, Cressida Jackson. The order supported missionaries off and on through the time in China, but most especially more recently then in Brazil with Carmen Wolfe and Elizabeth Daniel. And then in 1973, Pat Powers joined Elizabeth in Brazil. And by 1979, the two of them, particularly since Pat was a daughter, had established the first DOK chapter in Brazil. So when I mentioned before that that the members of Alpha chapter were no longer officers with the order as of 1907, Margaret had actually retired from elected leadership prior to that. She was in the chair at the convention in 1893. But in 1894, we read a story about the Alpha chapter presenting Margaret with a gold cross upon her retirement from being president of the order. As you recall me mentioning, our badge is our silver cross, and everyone gets a silver cross. But the Alpha chapter wanted to honor her, and they gave her this gold cross. Now, this is the back of the cross. The front looks the same as all of the other ones. So Margaret wore this cross for the duration of her life. And upon her death in 1931, she bequeathed it to the order. And that's why I'm showing the back of this cross. This was the cross that was same style, same material, just in gold in 1894. But she bequeathed it with the request that this cross be given to all of the succeeding national presidents for them to wear during this time in office. And that's basically, you have to get a magnifying glass out, even with the real cross, to be able to read that and see that that's what that says. But that's what all of that writing says, that at the bequest of Margaret Franklin, all succeeding presidents are to wear this cross. It's a very it's a strong sense of responsibility that ties you and connects you with all of the leaders who came before. It always kept me very grounded to remind me of where I was and who I served. But I got to tell you that the thing that scared me the most during those 3 years in office was losing that cross. That is the president's cross. It's not just invaluable, it is irreplaceable. So the tradition is that at the installation of officers, which occurs at the end of the triennial, the current outgoing president pins that cross, because as you see, there's no loop at the top to put on a chain. You pin that cross on the incoming president. And she takes on the joy and privilege of leading the order. In 1986, a new tradition was starting along with that, and that was the presentation of a gold cross to the outgoing president. So this started, Ethel Ripley received the first gold cross. So her successor, and I've had that name in mind and didn't write it down, so now can't bring it back. She pinned Ethel's cross to her. We do have a loop on ours, and this is the gold cross then is the one that we wear for the rest of our time here on earth. So Cressida Jackson pinned mine on me, and I hold dear that memory. So during Margaret's time, the office was in New York, had a couple of different locations. Sometimes it was with the national office. Sometimes it was in just a general office building. Some of it depended on how much money the order had and whether they could afford their own office. In 1981, however, the order moved to Georgia. Again, we were in some temporary locations. We were in church basements. We were in, the secretary was a paid position for many years and then became strictly volunteer, and they called the office manager or office administrator once it was separate from that, the jobs of being the national secretary. And that was some of the basements or the home offices for some of those office administrators. And then with the help of the endowment fund, they had collected enough in the endowment fund that they were able to purchase 4 offices in an office complex that was being newly built in Woodstock, Georgia. We moved into that building in 2000 and have been there ever since. So that gives us the location. So the one last thing about when you think about how you define an order or a state, we have our state bird, we have our state flower, we have our state song. Well, the order also has a song. So it's almost always had a song that, just as our motto and the prayer of the order would be said at gatherings, we would have the song that was sung. Well, we had to change songs because the song that had been sung did not appear in the 1982 hymnal. So in 1985, The theme as the theme, Lift High the Cross was so chosen. And since that time, Lift High the Cross has been our song. And you will hear that, you hear that mentioned. So I want to speak a little bit about Junior Daughters. As I mentioned, they started in 1896, or just a few years after the Senior Daughters had begun. And as I've mentioned in our mission, the work is to spread Christ's kingdom among women, especially young women and girls. The senior group grew out of a Sunday school group. So that would be the start for the Junior Daughters too, is out of Sunday school classes. I showed this picture of the dolls because it shows over a period of years, different visual aids that the Senior Daughters could use to show juniors, Sunday school girls, what their life could be like, taking the same vows that seniors do, what their services would look like. We have a photo of or picture, actually, drawn picture, girl in an apron. And that's kind of what these dolls are based on. They're a 3D aspect of the girl in the apron. And this would be used to talk about what kinds of service, again, that the girls would do to get them involved in that and thinking, obviously, outside themselves. These dolls have been written up in different newspaper articles across the country through the years and have even traveled for their own exhibit. Someday we may take them out again. Right now they live in the office and you would need to come to the archives room to see them. And as I said, this is just a representation. I'd mentioned before the 3 funds of the order. And in 2009, at our national convention in Pasadena, we elected to start a 4th fund, and that's the Junior Daughters Fund. Initially, it was named the Alpha Fund, after the first senior chapter's name, after the first junior chapter's name. But we then decided to rename it Juniors Fund because that was a more descriptive name. And that Junior Daughters Fund is used to support the junior daughters in their work, in the administration for them, whether it's hosting a tea or a luncheon, or just some kind of gathering for the girls to gather the girls together and to introduce the juniors to them, whether it's supplies to go through the study guide, whether it's quiet days for them or attending the retreats and our triennials. Those are the kinds of things that the Junior Daughters Funds are used for. Also mentioned earlier on, we have international daughters. And again, they have been with us from the beginning. In the 1890s, as I mentioned, Canada had so many chapters. I don't think that they were formally assembled as we now think of it for our international daughters now, but they had so many chapters that they had their own pages in the Royal Cross to report on their activities. In 1898, England had 7 chapters. It could boast the Archbishop of Canterbury as their patron. And Jamaica also had chapters. In 1898, there was a chapters formed in Antigua. Growth for the international order for international daughters has also gone up and down, much as it has for domestically for the daughters here in the U.S. But recently, the Orders of the Daughters of the King has seen an extraordinary growth in chapters and assemblies overseas, a growth reminiscent of the early decades of the order, some of the numbers and places that I just mentioned. Currently, we have chapters in, I believe, 22. I wrote down 21, but I don't think that's right. I think we had a couple done since then, and I couldn't find an exact number in the information that I had access to. So I think 22 countries, 5 of whom are actually assembled, and they have their own administration and their own triennials. And the others, they try to gather regionally, and we also always bring them into the States for our triennial. In some of the cases internationally, a country only has a single chapter, so we work to help them keep connected with each other and with us. In some cases, the chapters formed where American military personnel were stationed. I remember especially in Germany and Portugal had chapters established there. In other cases, either local leaders or missionaries discipled others and formed new chapters. Sometimes daughters working overseas who were going to be assigned there for a while established chapters where they were working and living. I think especially of France and Italy in those cases. Sometimes the new chapters, there were enough enthusiasm and energy, to quote Margaret, occurred that they developed into a national organization. And that happened with Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Malawi, and Uganda. Again, this is a pattern that characterized the early decades of the order when Canada, England, and Jamaica all developed their own national councils. The rapid international spread of the order early on seemed to slowed during and after World War I and with the Spanish flu, but it did not stop. The Canadian Council continued to publish its reports in the Royal Cross, and in the 1930s, the order that had taken root in Jamaica sent Letitia Lamb to introduce the order in Japan. Daughters continued to flourish for the next 40 years in Jamaica, but in Japan, due to the approaching clouds of war, contact was soon cut off with them. The approaching clouds of war also changed the focus of daughters in the United States, and a post-war hiatus occurred in the international activities in the order. The Canadian Council became inactive, and along with its network of contacts in the other countries of the British Commonwealth, we lost contact with them. In the 1990s, a renewed international interest began for the order, just as multiple renewal movements were sweeping the Episcopal churches. I mentioned before Pat Powers and Elizabeth Daniels introducing the order to Brazil, and this was a gift from the daughters in Brazil, and this is hanging in the archives room at the national office. So obviously that planting grew strong and healthy. In 1991, an invitation came from Uganda, where the Brotherhood of St. Andrew was already at work, and Elizabeth Hart went out to meet the women of Uganda. Short-term missionary Linda Smoke talked up the daughters in several countries of the Caribbean basin, and more doors opened. That was followed by chapters in Cuba, Honduras, and Honduras. A chapter had opened in South Africa, and Deborah Ajikawe used her frequent work-related trips to Africa to visit with them and to introduce bishops in each country to the value of daughters' chapters, especially junior chapters. And in swift succession, she planted the order in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, as well as visiting those daughters in Uganda. She also visited daughters in Cuba and Brazil. Meanwhile, Esther Miller, a missionary supported by the Episcopal Church and daughters and ECW and a few others, she was at work in Malawi, where strong leadership has emerged and many chapters have formed, and they also assembled. And they have taken the good news of Christ through the order into other countries in Africa, where chapters recently have reformed in South Africa and newly formed in the Gambia, Liberia, and Zambia. There's also been more interest spreading in the Caribbean basin, where we have countries in the Dominican Republic, the Virgin Islands, Haiti, and Puerto Rico, Mexico, and Panama. So this is a slide of our office that we built and moved into in 2000. And it's our headquarters. We do have a chapel there, but no one actually lives there, so we can't quite refer to it as a mother house, but it is really the working heart of our spiritual home where we can all gather. Today, we continue to take the same vows of prayer and service that Margaret and her initial band first wrote together. Our rule of prayer is to pray daily for the unity of Christ's church, for the spread of Christ's kingdom, especially among women and girls, for God's blessing upon the members of the order, and for the spiritual growth of the parish and for the clergy of the parish to which the chapter owes allegiance. A little more detail than what Margaret gave us, but still the same basic outline. Our rule of service is a little more independent for each chapter, praying on what they are called to do for their church. But within that rule of service, we promise to be Christ's faithful servant in the extension of his kingdom, to regularly take part in the worship, study, and work of the church, and to render at all times aid to the clergy as deemed necessary for the spiritual upbuilding of the parish. And sometimes it looks just like days of yore. And in Margaret's report that I read, she talked about one of the first things that Alpha chapter do was building up the Sunday school library. In my current parish, we have daughters who are maintaining the library in our resource room. Nice circle. In taking our vows, we reaffirm the promises made at baptism and confirmation. We pledge ourselves to a lifelong program of prayer, service, dedicated to the spread of Christ's kingdom and the strengthening of the spiritual life of her parish. As I was reading the reports that talked about the numbers of members at different points of the years, Margaret and her small band of the Sunday school class of the Daughters of the King has impacted thousands and thousands of women. And it is really difficult to think of how many more we daughters impact because we don't know. We can but spread the seed, share the news, and the Spirit goes from there. We are, as mentioned, we are a semi-religious organization, and we try to stay on that same high plane that they originally planned for us, but we also try to work in partnership with all of the other religious groups and societies. So in that respect, I especially appreciate the introduction from today. And with daughters, I don't say we always, but as we are talking amongst ourselves and where we have been during the 40 years that we have been a member, or the 10 years that we have been a member, or the 1 year that we have been a member, and what technology has been able to do for us today, we think back and wonder what Margaret would think about her order in this day and age, and we hope that she would be pleased. Again, thank you. Any questions? Let me stop sharing.
Okay. I have several questions in the chat, so I'm going to mention that. We will also put in the chat the link to the webpage for Daughters of the King, so that those of you who are interested in knowing more or joining or whatever, you will be able to do that. This is from Joan Gunderson, our vice president. She says that an interesting coincidence is the meeting of the Daughters' first council was held at St. Bartholomew's Church in New York, and the fact that the Episcopal Women's History Project formed at a meeting held at that very same church 89 years later. So that's a fun one. Thank you for that, Joan.
Yes, thank you. That also speaks to the longevity of the influence of that church.
Right. Now, this one is an interesting one from Alexandria Gresset. Are the archives of the Daughters of the King available for research? And she says, I recently found both my mother and great-grandmother appear to have been members. I have their crosses.
Oh,
Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, first, I think it's very exciting that you still have the crosses. My next comment would be that when you are able to share them, they are not actually yours. They do belong to the order. All of the crosses are basically on loan to us that we wear as our badge of membership and Christian obligation during our lifetime. And as upon our death, they are to either be buried with us or returned to the national office. And that is how we have quite a collection. I didn't think to get a good I didn't get a good picture of it when I was in archives. Some of the things that I showed now, I was in archives in December and took pictures of many of the things that I just showed on the slide. Didn't get a good one of the crosses, but that's where we've gotten some of the crosses over the years. We have some of our very early crosses, and you could see how the design changed infinitesimally, but at one point, the points on the cross would actually cut. So they unsharpened them. They curved them just a little bit more. But from those bringing the crosses back to us, that's how we got some of those crosses. For the archives, yes, it is open for research. We're trying to get as much put on digitally as we can. If you go to our website, and the link has been put in the chat, you go to resources, you go to the drop-down box for the resources. You can find the Royal, under communication, you can find the Royal Cross, and we have many of the Royal Crosses that are in existence. We have available online. We have a section from the 20s that haven't quite made it to digital yet, but you can get that August 1892 Royal Cross available online. The archive room is open for research. It is basically by appointment. You can't just walk in. There are some, there's a policy, there's a process that we would like you to follow and get in contact with the staff at the office, and they will set up the appointment with you. They will get the records out that you would like to use, and they would be making the arrangements. But it is, while we have a lot available online, we don't have everything. So we do have records in the office where it is open, and it's open not just to daughters. We had, so after Lillian Funston Ward made her trip in missionary work to China, Charlie Warnock was working as a missionary first in China and then in Japan. So a member of her parish was researching, and Charlie was a daughter, but a member of her parish was researching her. She was not a daughter, but she came to our archives room so that she could do some of the research on Charlie. And of course, that helped us because we didn't know anything about Charlie Warnock other than knowing that, yes, the order had supported her, and whatever reports had come back into the Royal Cross and were published in the Royal Cross. But she shared her research with us. I think I forgot part of that question, or did I get it all?
I'm going to move on because we have some more questions, and we have only 4 minutes left.
Oh,
Girl-Friendly Society, this is from Marianne Hobby. The Girls-Friendly Society, was there much interaction other than what was noted in 1893 convention? And then she wants to know the name of the film that you saw from that first film from the order.
so the Girls Friendly Society, while this seemed to indicate that it had started with the order, I don't believe it actually did. I think it then became independent. I know, having worked through ECW also supported the Girls Friendly.
Mhm.
So I know it is still in existence. So at some point, the order started putting more energy into the junior daughters, because when you looked at the 1893 program, it was girls friendly. The girls' junior daughters started then in 1896 and subsequent to that. And I think that's where the energy went with girls friendly.
Okay. And then the film. What was the
So
name of
the
the film?
film, I'm sorry, I am drawing a blank on that. Sandra, could I look that up? Is there a way that you could respond to that later?
Yes, we'll post it on our website.
There are so many details I remember about that. It was a
Okay.
parish, Saint, I want to say Saint Thaddeus in Aiken, South Carolina. And
Okay.
it was a film on starting the chapter and the service projects that the chapter did. I can picture them in their shirtwaist dresses and the gloves and the hats and the stockings there's so much. The title of it,
Okay, we will post that. We will find it and
thank
post
you.
it so that we'll find a place to do that. I'll have Liz help me with that. The next comment is from Joan Gunderson again. Two of the dolls are interesting. One looks like a Barbie doll.
Hmm?
The smallest doll appears to be an 8-inch Madame Alexander doll, popular in the 1950s.
Mhm.
Barbie became the most common doll in 1960s. Joan is a historian, so these are things she actually knows.
She is exactly right. We had a daughter in Kansas who used, so most of those dolls from that period are in different. We picked the ones that showed the girl in the apron thing. Um, they have them dressed as nurses and in different priestly robes
Oh,
and a couple of different things. So that was and obviously they fell out of popularity when Barbie came along. So they
sure.
started doing some of the same thing with
Yeah,
Barbie.
fun. The next comment is one that I made. Ellen Snow, who was a missionary along with her husband, Bob Snow, from Nebraska, was in the Dominican Republic for 16 years. She became a daughter here in Nebraska and then was the impetus and the facilitator for starting the chapter in the Dominican Republic. And I have attended one of their assembly meetings, and they are incredible. They all dress in white and blue, and they have really a wonderful gathering. So
I
that's just
was
a comment.
yeah, I was blessed to be able to attend Malawi's triennial in 2015. And they just celebrated their 25th, their Jubilee
Oh,
last
wonderful,
year. And
wonderful.
they too, they have uniforms. They don't just dress in white and blue. They actually have uniforms. It is, if you, yeah, it's moving, very
Mhm.
moving experience to be able to attend any of the international chapters. I was also uh, blessed to be able to attend a triennial in Brazil. And yeah, very
Our
special.
last question, and I'm going to ask you to just very briefly give us a response. Do the DOK have representatives at the 70th UN conference on the status of women that's going on at the United Nations?
We do not.
Okay.
As to my recollection, we have not had representation at that group in any year. I I don't have an official reason why.
Okay.
I have a personal opinion, but I don't have an official reason. We just have not traditionally participated there.
Okay. All right. And that's an incredible experience. I was able to do that when I was UTO board chair. So it's really a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I was almost an alternate when I was with ECW, but didn't quite. The,
We
the first choice got to go.
I need to go, but I want to give Renee Escoffery Torres has a comment. How has the order been impacted by the formation of ACNA? And I don't know what that is. And most
Anglican,
recently, the formation of GAFCON.
uh, I don't believe we will have that GAFCON will be impacting us.
Okay.
The ACNA actually can, I believe that's one of them. There are a number of different Episcopal churches that when they left the Episcopal Church,
Oh, okay.
joined different Anglican groups. Some of them are allowed to be in the order and some aren't. So at this point, the order is not strictly Protestant Episcopal. It is Protestant Episcopal. We have Roman Catholic chapters, we have Lutheran chapters, and we have chapters, Anglican chapters that are within the historic episcopate.
Okay. Thank you. that one could take a whole hour to talk about that. Uh, uh, thank you so much. And I want to invite everybody next week. For those of you who've been attending as we go along, you know that we had a kind of a kerfuffle, and Joan filled it for us the first week, last week. And we will have a presentation on Polly Murray by Heather Hike, who is a board member and historian, a public historian. So she will be here next week with what I think will be another very interesting presentation. Susan, thank you so
Oh, you're very
much.
welcome. I was so glad to be here.
Yeah, it just was delightful to have this history of an organization I belonged to for 25 years. I love it. So,
It would not be the same life without it.
no, I agree. I agree. So thank you very much for attending. We hope to see you next week, and so long.